The fire burned low beneath the dusk sky, and the wind carried with it something foul and final. Ransom Boone didn't know why his horse had slowed, only that it had. The stallion sniffed the air, muscles tight beneath the saddle. Ransom, tall in the saddle and quiet as ever, reached down and ran a hand across the animal's neck. The pines creaked around them. Somewhere off to the east, a hawk screamed high into the cliffs. But something was wrong. He could feel it in his jaw, the way it clenched on its own. That old sense. Same one that had kept him alive through 3 winters with the Apache, 1 full war and 2 near hangings. He kicked the horse gently, and they moved forward through the woods where the trail wasn't marked, and the smoke came thin and strange from the valley below. That's when he saw it. First, it looked like just a tree, gnarled and blackened, older than anything else around it. But as Ransom rode closer, he spotted something tied to its trunk. Rope, a figure. He dismounted slowly, boots crunching frozen pine needles. His rifle stayed in his left hand, but it dipped low as he stepped forward, breath tight, eyes narrowing against the half-light. She was unconscious, or dead, but even in that stillness, there was something unbearable in how she slumped. Her dress was torn in several places, old fabric once dyed blue now gray with ash and grime. Her wrists were tied behind her, and her head lolled to one side, long strands of dark hair matted with blood and sap. He stepped closer. Her feet were bare. Her skin, where it wasn't bruised, was pale and delicate. And she was breathing, just barely. Ransom cursed under his breath, knife already out. He cut the ropes from around her arms and caught her just as she slipped forward. She didn't scream, didn't stir, just collapsed into his arms like she'd been waiting for it. Like her body had surrendered long before he ever arrived. He looked around quickly. Nothing but wind and trees. Someone had left her there. No, placed her. He knew a ritual site when he saw one. The scorch marks, the trampled ground, the fire still warm. It wasn't just cruelty. This was a sacrifice, an offering. But to who? And why her? He lifted her carefully and brought her to his horse. She was light, too light, and her breath came in slow, weak pulses against his neck as he rode. He didn't ask questions. Not yet. He just rode. An hour later, they reached the base of the ridge where his lean-to sat tucked behind a wall of stone. The stream was frozen along the edges, but he broke the ice and brought water in a tin cup to her lips. She barely drank, but her eyes fluttered, and a sound left her throat. A word? A name? He laid her down on a cot of thick hides and watched her breathe. Then he sat. He didn't sleep that night, just watched and waited. By morning, she stirred. She winced as the light hit her face, and her hand jerked slightly, searching for ropes that weren't there. Her eyes opened, dark brown, wide and panicked, and when they met his, she froze. He raised both hands slowly. "You're safe now," he said. She didn't speak. He handed her the cup again. She stared at it, then at him, then drank. Not all of it, but enough. "Name's Ransom Boone," he said softly. "I found you out past the East Trail, tied to a tree. You remember any of that?" Her eyes flicked to the doorway, to the snow outside, then back to him. "Where am I?" Her voice was cracked, faint. "Few miles north of Dry Creek. This is just a camp. I move around." She looked at her hands. The rope burns, the bruises on her forearms. Her dress still hung from her in shreds, and Ransom stood suddenly, grabbing a thick wool blanket from his saddle pack and handing it to her without a word. She wrapped it around herself, tight. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She hesitated. Then, just above a whisper, she said, "Zara." It didn't sound like a name from these parts, but there was something in her face that told him she didn't belong to any place at all. "You remember who tied you up?" he asked. She swallowed hard and nodded, but her eyes went distant. "My father," she said. Ransom felt the cold hit his chest then, not from the wind. He waited. Zara looked down at her wrist, at the burn there. "He said the rains hadn't come because I was unclean, because I asked questions, laughed too loud, wanted too much. He said the land needed blood. So they picked me. Ransom's jaw tightened. They? The whole village. The elders. My mother just looked at the floor. She didn't cry. She said it the way a woman speaks of something already buried. I don't know how long I was out there, she whispered. I thought maybe the spirits would come and take me. Or wolves. Ransom looked into the fire. They didn't, he said. I did. Zara stared at him for a long moment. Didn't ask her to explain again. She stayed silent most days, watching the wind move the trees, sleeping deep and long. Ransom hunted quietly and came back without a sound. He patched the roof of the shelter, reinforced the fire pit, cleaned his rifle, but always with one ear toward her. Then, one afternoon, she stood. He turned from the stream and saw her by the fire, wrapped still in that old wool, but standing on her own, eyes on him. I don't know where to go, she said. You don't have to yet, he answered. She walked to the edge of the shelter and looked out across the snow. They'll come looking. Not for me. For the shame. Ransom nodded. They'll want to finish what they started, she said. Another nod. Zara looked at him then. And you? What do you want? He didn't answer right away, but when he did, it was firm. I want to see you live. That night they didn't speak, but she fell asleep with her head on his shoulder. The fire burned low again, and outside, the stars wheeled above them like they had since time began. But something had changed. A woman once left for dead now breathed free, and a man who'd ridden most of his life alone now had something to lose. Zara was awake before the sun. The sound of her feet brushing pine needles pulled Ransom from sleep, and by the time he sat up, she was already kneeling by the fire pit, adding kindling with deliberate, quiet hands. Her hair was still wild, but she moved like someone who had once known structure, who had learned at some point how to keep her head down, stay small, stay useful. Not from weakness, from survival. He didn't say a word as she poured water into the blackened tin pot and set it over the flame. She didn't look up either, but he watched her. There was a stillness in her that hadn't been there before. Something collected. Not peace exactly. Not yet, but the beginning of one. After a while, she finally spoke. I heard coyotes last night. They come close sometimes, he said. I used to think they were evil. Spirits of the hungry dead. That's what the elders said. But now, she trailed off. What do you think now? He asked. Zara looked toward the tree line, where the shadows still clung to the trunks. I think they were trying to talk to me. Ransom didn't mock her, didn't question it. Maybe they were, he said. The wind picked up then, brushing snow from the pine limbs, and Zara pulled her blanket closer. But she didn't return to the cot. She stayed out there as the day rose over the ridge, drinking water, pulling her hair back, braiding it with stiff, calloused fingers. Her hands were still healing. Her face bore faint marks like wind-burned parchment. But she was coming back to herself. Slowly, quietly. That evening, when Ransom returned from checking his traps, she was waiting with questions. Did you ever have people? She asked. He set down the small rabbit he'd caught, nodding once. Long time ago. Family? A brother. Parents died when I was young. And your brother? Then finally her shoulders shook. Not a sob, not a cry, just release, like a soul uncurling for the first time in years. He brought her warm broth that night, and a better blanket, and never once asked for anything in return. He didn't touch her. Gone too. She didn't pry further, but her silence was not disinterest. It was understanding. The kind that comes from knowing that digging too deep can make an old wound start bleeding again. Later that night, as they sat beside the fire, she touched the side of her neck where a faded bruise still lingered. They said I was too loud, too forward, too much like the cursed women from the North stories. They said I asked things that shouldn't be asked. Ransom stirred the fire absently with a stick. Like what? Zara's lips lifted into something close to a smile, small, brittle. Like why the water dried up even when we prayed. Why the crops failed even after fasting. Why women had to pay the price for men's anger. She looked up at him. And why our gods were always hungry. That hung in the air between them, sharp as smoke. Ransom didn't offer comfort. He knew better. Sometimes it wasn't needed. The next morning, they left the shelter. Zara was wrapped in one of his spare coats now, and though her steps were slow, she walked beside him, not behind. They headed west, toward the ridge trail that led to a small hunting cabin he knew of, tucked deep in a grove where no road reached. Ransom had fixed it up once for a friend who never made it back. It would be safer than the open lean-to now that someone might be looking. "Do you think they'll come?" she asked as they hiked. "Maybe. If they do, will you kill them?" He didn't answer for a long while. Finally, he said, "If I have to." Zara didn't flinch. She just nodded. At the cabin, they worked in silence to patch holes in the wall and reinforce the door. There was an old iron stove inside, and Ransom showed her how to prime the flue, how to keep the heat from escaping. Zara listened carefully, absorbing each detail. Her hands, still raw, moved with quiet urgency. At dusk, as they sat by the fire again, she pulled something from her pocket, a small woven cord. It looked ancient, dirt-stained and fraying. "This was my sister's," she said. "They sacrificed her 2 years ago. Same tree, same fire. Said she'd brought bad luck by looking at a man too long." Ransom's breath caught. "What happened to your mother?" he asked. Zara looked down. She watched, said it was her duty not to stop it. There was no anger in her voice, no hatred, just ash. They fell asleep back to back that night, both near the fire, both holding knives. The next morning, tracks in the snow. Boots, fresh, deep. Ransom found them 50 yards out from the cabin. For sets, maybe 5. Moving cautiously, too cautiously for wild travelers. He came back inside. Zara was already at the window. "How many?" "4, he said. "Maybe 5. She closed her eyes. "They'll wait until dark." "Most likely." She turned to him then. "Then let's not be here." They didn't run. They vanished. Ransom knew paths no map had ever drawn. They moved through dry ravines under thick branches across ice-covered streams. By the time night fell, they were miles away, hidden in a rock cave only coyotes and owls knew. Zara huddled close beside him, silent. When morning came, she finally asked the thing she hadn't dared before. "Why'd you stop, that day, when you saw me tied to that tree?" He looked at her long and hard. "Because no one ever stopped for my mother." The silence that followed wasn't sad. It was sacred. They spent the next few days in the highlands. Ransom hunted. Zara cooked. They hardly spoke, but their silence was never empty. It was full of slow trust, of glances that held meaning, of a fire growing somewhere below words. And then, one morning, she kissed him, softly, no request, no demand, just a breath against his lips. Ransom didn't move, not away, not forward. He let it happen, let it settle. Then his hand found hers, and they sat like that until the light turned gold. But peace never lasts long in the West. 3 days later, they found the old cabin burned. No bodies, but messages scrawled in ash. Words carved into trees. "Cursed woman, thief of blood, return what was offered." Zara stared at it, then turned to him. "They're coming." Ransom looked over the ridge. "Let them." That night she didn't sleep. Neither did he. They sat beneath the stars, rifles ready, hearts tight. But they weren't running anymore. They were waiting, together. The fire was just cinders now. But Zara didn't move. She sat near its edge, one knee pulled to her chest, eyes fixed on the faint horizon through the black silhouettes of the trees. She hadn't said a word in hours. Not since they'd found the old cabin burned out and the words carved into the bark. Not since the sky had started falling quiet in a way that meant something was about to break. Ransom came up behind her slow, boots soundless on pine needles. He didn't say anything either, just eased down beside her, his rifle over one shoulder, jaw hard with knowing. She spoke first. "They won't stop now." He nodded. "I know. They'll keep coming until they take me back. Or until I'm ashes." He didn't deny it. Zara turned toward him, finally. "Then we don't run." Ransom studied her in the half-dark. Her eyes were calm, not crazed, steady like iron cooled after the forge. It wasn't defiance. It was readiness. He nodded once. All right. They moved camp again, but not far. Just enough to get high ground. Ransom had learned a long time ago that defense wasn't about walls, it was about position. You hold the ridge, you hold your life. He set traps, dug shallow blinds, gathered dried grass to camouflage the lean-to's outer edge. Zara helped, wordless. She knew how to move in the woods now, how to silence her breath, how to wrap cloth around her boots to muffle steps. 2 days passed, then 3. On the 4th, they heard the first whistle. It came with the morning wind, soft, rising once like a bird call, then gone. Zara's whole body tensed. That's them, she whispered. Ransom cocked the rifle. Scouts. By dusk, they'd spotted movement in the trees. Just flashes. Cloth. Skin. The gleam of metal. Ransom counted at least 6, maybe more behind the ridge. They were slow, cautious, trained in the kind of hunting that wasn't for meat, but for people. Zara gripped his arm that night, long after the fire was buried under cold ash. If they take me, she whispered, don't come after me. Don't let them take you too. He turned to her. You think I pulled you off that tree to give you back? She swallowed. I think they'll kill you. They might. Then why? Because I'd rather die beside you than live knowing I let them win. She looked away, but her hand didn't leave his. It only tightened. The first man came before dawn. He was quiet, crouched, knife in hand, thinking the camp was still asleep. Ransom saw him before he crested the ridge. He waited until the glint of the blade showed against the snow, then fired once. The shot cracked like a whip through the valley. Echoes flew. The man dropped before his own cry could leave his mouth. But that shot woke the rest. They came like wolves, fast, coordinated. 4 from the trees, 2 from below. Zara moved to the blind as they'd practiced, crawling through the pine netting, silent as breath. Ransom stayed just long enough to fire again, then melted into the shadows behind a downed log. He waited. 2 came close, close enough for breath. 1 stepped over the trap. His foot sank, the iron jaws snapped, and his scream tore through the ridge. The second turned in panic. Ransom fired once, then again. 3 down, but there were more. Zara held her knife with both hands now, crouched in the hollow under the rocks. She could hear them, footsteps, voices in their native tongue, urgent, angry. Then 1 came too near. He leaned in, close enough to smell the blood on his boots. Zara didn't hesitate. She lunged. The blade found soft under rib, then twisted. The man gasped once, gurgled, dropped. Zara didn't stop moving. She crawled out into the half-light, sprinting low to the second trapline. 2 more were there, searching, blades raised. She didn't have a rifle, but she had speed. She snatched the rock Ransom had sharpened the day before and flung it, hard, into the brush to their left. They turned just enough. Ransom rose behind them. 2 shots. Silence. By mid-morning, it was over. 6 bodies. 1 breathing barely. The first man, his leg caught in the trap, moaning through clenched teeth. Zara stood over him. You knew what they would do to me, she said, voice flat. The man spat blood. You were born to bleed. It was your place. Ransom raised the rifle, but Zara reached out. No. She knelt beside the man and whispered something in his ear. Whatever it was made his eyes go wide with terror. She stood and turned away. Leave him. He can tell the others what he saw. They rode out that afternoon. Ransom's old mule carried their gear. Zara walked for a while until the slope grew steep. Then she climbed up behind him, arms around his waist, her cheek pressed to his back. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. They moved west again, further than before, through hills no one bothered to name, past valleys where no smoke rose. For 2 weeks they didn't see another soul. But the silence between them had changed. Zara began to hum sometimes, old melodies, strange and low, songs from before the gods had turned cruel. She didn't smile often, but when she did, it came without flinch, without apology. And Ransom, he watched her the way a starving man watches the return of spring. One night, as they sat by a creek, she asked, "What do you see when you look at me?" He took a long breath. "A woman who survived what should have killed her, who still walks with fire in her eyes." She looked down. "And do you think I'm cursed?" "No," he said. "I think you're what curses fear." She kissed him again that night, but this time he kissed her back. A month passed. They found a place, an old ranch once owned by a family who'd long gone east. The fences were half rotted. The barn leaned like an old man's knees, but the land was good, quiet, hidden. Ransom fixed the roof. Zara planted seeds. They didn't talk about forever. They didn't need to. One day, as she washed clothes by the creek, Zara looked up to find him watching her again. "What?" she asked, drying her hands. He tilted his head. "Thinking. About. How I never meant to save anyone. How I thought I'd live alone until the ground took me." She walked up to him, wet hands brushing his face. "You didn't save me," she said. "You just cut the rope. I walked the rest myself." He nodded, eyes heavy. "Still, I'd do it again." Zara smiled. "You already did." There was something in the way she stared across the plain that morning, something hollow, like she saw something far off that hadn't reached them yet. Zara stood still, a wooden pail in one hand, not even noticing the rooster dart past her boots. The wind picked up dust from the far hills and carried it in slow, drowsy waves toward the cabin. But she didn't blink. Ransom noticed. He was stacking firewood by the back wall, hat off, sweat already drying on his shirt. He wiped his palms, walked over, and stood beside her. "What is it?" Zara's voice was low. "Something's coming." He turned his gaze toward the horizon, but saw nothing but open land and pale blue. "You sure?" She nodded once, sharp. "Felt it in my chest before I saw anything." He didn't question her. Not anymore. They packed that night. Not to run. Not this time. But to be ready. They'd made a life here over the last 2 months. Quiet mostly. The kind of silence that teaches you where all the floorboards creak and when the wolves come near the chickens. Zara had begun to speak more freely, to laugh sometimes even. Her hair had grown longer, and she'd stopped tying it back with leather. Ransom had begun carving things again. Little wooden horses, spoons, even a whistle she used to call the mule. But none of that meant the past had let them go. And now, whatever had tracked her soul across the basin had found their scent again. That night, she asked him to sit close. Not for fear, but for something deeper. "I remember the first time they marked me," she whispered. "I was 10. They made me kneel on the stones by the river and slice my palm open. Said the blood had to mix with water to seal the covenant." Ransom kept his hand on hers. "And did you believe it?" Zara didn't answer right away. Her eyes reflected the firelight like polished bronze. "I believed it would hurt, and it did. Every year since, they came for me again. Made me give a little more. And the last time? They didn't ask. They just took." The fire popped. Somewhere in the trees, a coyote yipped low and vanished into the dark. "I'll never let them take you again," Ransom said. Zara looked at him then. "I know." The next day, the first sign appeared. A stone, painted red, laid deliberately at the end of their trail. A symbol carved into its face, a jagged spiral through a closed eye. Zara stopped cold when she saw it. "Blood Eye," she muttered. "They sent the first men." Ransom hadn't heard of them, not by that name, but he didn't need to. Zara's face told him enough. These weren't scouts or fanatics. These were the ones who came when all other threats had failed. The ones who didn't bring messages, only ends. "We don't have enough bullets for a war," he said. Zara looked at him. "We don't need to win it." She crouched beside the stone, took out a knife, and smeared ash across the spiral. Then she whispered a phrase in a language he didn't know, sharp and rhythmic, like a song but without joy. "What was that?" he asked. "A lie," she said, standing. "But they'll believe it." That night, they laid their own traps, not just iron and gunpowder, but something older. Zara took the bones of a coyote, bound them with sage and twine, and hung them at the corners of the fence. She drew circles in soot and blood by the window sills and buried shards of glass facing outward beneath the dirt. When Ransom asked what it all meant, she said simply, "They see symbols better than they see men." By dawn, the winds shifted again, and by noon, the sky changed color. It wasn't dust or storm cloud. It was something thicker, a hush, like the world was holding its breath. Then the birds stopped singing, and Ransom knew. They're here. They didn't come with torches or horses. They came on foot, wrapped in furs though the heat boiled over the plains. Masks covered their faces, carved wood, painted with faces too wide, too grinning. One by one they emerged from the tree line, silent, deliberate. 6, 8, 9. They circled the house but didn't speak, didn't move closer. Ransom stood in the doorway, rifle ready. Zara stood beside him, hair braided, a small dagger tucked in each sleeve. Then the tallest stepped forward. His mask was bone white with no eyes, only a mouth carved into a scream. He raised both arms and waited. Zara stepped forward too and sang. The melody was strange, low and spiraled, as if sung backward. Ransom couldn't make sense of the words, but the men outside did. They began to sway gently, like reeds in wind. Then she stopped and whispered one word, cracked like thunder through the silence. The masked men staggered. One dropped to his knees. Zara stepped back inside. "They think I've bound myself to something darker than them, that I've made a pact." "Have you?" Ransom asked. Zara turned her face toward him, unreadable. "I made a pact with you." The men did not attack that night. They stayed on the edges, watching, waiting. Ransom stayed awake, rifle never leaving his hand. Zara slept in short bursts, waking each time the wind shifted. By the third day, one of the masked men disappeared. No sound, no trace. On the fourth day, they left something at the door. A branch wrapped in black cloth and soaked in what looked like tar. Zara burned it without touching it. "They're testing us," she said, "trying to see if we'll break first." And that's when she made a decision. "We have to go to them." Ransom frowned. "Walk into them? That's suicide." She shook her head. "It's the only way to end this. If I run, they'll follow forever. If I fight, they'll keep sending more. But if I show them I am not afraid." He grabbed her wrist. "Then I'm going too." She paused, then nodded once. "We walked together." That night, under the weight of stars and fireless sky, Zara walked to the clearing where they'd first appeared. Ransom walked behind her, steps slow, deliberate. She held no weapon, only a stone, black and smooth, tucked into her palm. The masked men were waiting. When they saw her, they stepped aside. At the center of the clearing was a circle of stones. Inside it, ash. And in the center of that, a single bone knife. Zara walked straight to it. "They want me to finish it," she said. "To cut the last tie." Ransom didn't move. "You don't have to prove anything to them." "I'm not proving it to them." She stepped into the circle, lifted the knife, and cut her palm. The blood fell on the ash. Then she reached down, took a handful, and smeared it across her own face. 2 black lines under each eye. Then she turned. "I'm not yours," she said, voice clear. "I was never yours. I belong to no gods and no ghosts. If you follow me again, I'll drag your bones across every altar you ever built." The forest shook, not with wind, but with the kind of power that only comes when something very old is broken. The masked men dropped to their knees. One by one, they removed their masks, and behind them were boys, young, barely men, afraid. Zara walked past them, never looked back. Ransom followed. They returned home before sunrise. The sky was turning soft over the ridge. Zara washed her face in the creek, the blood and ash swirling away like old stories. Then she sat in the grass, quiet. Ransom sat beside her. "You all right?" She nodded. "They won't come again." He leaned back. "Then we finally rest." She smiled. "Not rest, build." And she kissed him, not with fear, but with the calm of a woman who had buried the last of her chains. By the time spring rose from the cold ground, there was almost no trace left of the old life. The tree where she had once been tied stood far behind them now, across ridges and rivers, half a world away it seemed. But in Zara's dreams, sometimes she still heard the bark creak against the ropes. Sometimes she'd wake with the scent of pine and ash in her nose, her hand reaching for a knife that wasn't there. But Ransom was always there, not speaking, not touching, just there, present, real. That was enough. They'd built the cabin again farther up the canyon, where the red rock caught fire at sunset and the wind didn't howl so cruelly. They kept goats, a mule, and now chickens too. Zara had planted green things in the soil and sang over them the way her grandmother used to. Soft, low, full of things no one else understood. And somehow they grew, stronger than anything Ransom had ever seen. One morning, as the sun touched the canyon rim, she pressed his hand to her belly and smiled. "I think I'm making something," she whispered. He blinked slow, then leaned forward and kissed her forehead. "You already made this place a home. I'd believe you could grow the stars if you wanted." Zara chuckled. "Just a baby'll do for now." But that wasn't what the world had planned. The rider came in the third week of May. Ransom was out near the bluff checking the fence when he saw him, lone, hunched, barely holding onto the reins of a limping Mustang. Dust coated every inch of him except the eyes. By the time Ransom got close, the man fell sideways off the saddle, coughing blood. "Don't let him take her," he rasped. "They're coming, woman with the sun in her hair. The altar's not fed." Ransom's chest turned to stone. He knelt. "Who?" The man grabbed his collar, eyes bulging. "The Crimson Order. From the Drylands. They heard she lived." Then his head dropped back and he was gone. Ransom buried him there under a cedar, then galloped home. Zara was already waiting on the porch. "You heard it?" he asked. She nodded. "Felt it." That night, she went to the box under the bed. She hadn't opened it since they'd left the old basin. Inside were 5 things. A black feather, a spool of red thread, a chunk of obsidian, the necklace of teeth she'd once worn in battle, and a folded piece of cloth marked with her family's crest. She took out the obsidian. Ransom watched her. "You're not that person anymore. I'll always be her," she said. "But now I'm more too." He swallowed. "Then what do we do?" "We don't run," Zara said. "Not anymore." The Crimson Order didn't sneak. They came with banners. It was a strange thing, watching the ridge fill with riders in red, each with their faces painted white, their hands gloved, their spears high. A woman led them, her cloak dragging behind her like blood through snow. She didn't ride a horse. She walked. When she stepped onto the clearing before the cabin, she called out with a voice that echoed. "Zara of the Shale Circle, your ancestors owe a debt. The altar thirsts." Zara stood at the doorway. "I gave you blood. I gave you silence. I gave you exile. No more." The woman raised her hand. "Then we will take it from the child." Ransom stepped forward, rifle leveled. "You'll take nothing." The woman's eyes found his. "You're not part of this. I am now." That night they prepared. The traps weren't iron. They weren't twine. Zara took stones from the creek and spoke to them. She marked the door with ash and herb. She bathed in cold water and sang until her voice cracked. And when the moon rose, she cut her palm once more and pressed it to the earth. It hissed. Ransom stayed close, wrapping the cabin in barbed wire and logs soaked in oil. "You think it'll hold them?" he asked. "No," she said. "But it'll remind them I remember who I am." The battle didn't begin with war cries. It began with silence. And then fire. The trees lit first, torches hurled from behind the ridge. The smoke curled black and thick into the canyon. Then the riders came, dozens strong, painted faces gleaming in the flames. Ransom fired twice, one fell, another veered, but they kept coming. Zara stood still, arms raised, eyes closed. When they reached the line of stones she'd laid, 3 of the horses reared, screaming. The riders were thrown. Then the ground beneath the cabin cracked. Smoke and flame shot upward from the circle she'd drawn the night before. A sound, like metal grinding against bone, shook the air. The riders paused. Then the woman in the crimson cloak stepped forward. "You invoke the Old One," she hissed. "You dare twist his power?" Zara opened her eyes. "No, I break it." She hurled the obsidian into the fire. It exploded in black smoke. And the woman screamed. The flames turned blue. The riders dropped their weapons and clutched their ears. Ransom pulled Zara back into the cabin as the wind howled and the trees bent backward. Lightning, without storm, lit the canyon over and over until the sky cracked open and rained ash. When it was done, nothing moved. Only the woman in red remained. Kneeling now, robes soaked, face bare. Zara stepped forward. "You'll leave. You'll never return. You'll speak my name again only as warning." The woman looked up and nodded. Then she stood and walked into the trees. Alone. Days passed. They didn't speak much. There wasn't much to say. But slowly things grew still again. The chickens returned. The mule began braying at sunrise. The water in the creek ran clear. Zara stood one morning with her hand on her belly, smiling. Ransom came up behind her. "She quiet now?" Zara nodded. "I think she's listening." She laughed. "Don't you feel it?" He rested his hand against her stomach. And he did. Not just life, but power. Pure. Gentle. Unbreakable. "She'll change everything," Zara said. Ransom looked at her. "She already has." And far from that place, deep in the red deserts where temples crumble and old bones lie forgotten, a new name was whispered among the dying fires. Zara the Unbound. The last to break the altar. The first to walk away.